Do you believe the price of oil and gas will be lower before the midterm elections?
I hope so. I mean, I think so. It could be. It could be or the same or maybe a little bit higher, but it should be around the same. I think this won't be that much longer.
If anything, if this goes on, which it's likely to do, unless President Trump concedes defeat, then the price of gasoline, just inflation in general, is going to go through the roof. Almost everybody understands that. The situation only gets worse moving forward. We are, Danny, getting closer and closer to the iceberg. All you have to do is read about what the economic situation looks like in a place like South Korea at this point in time. You know, I've made the argument the South Koreans are very upset about the fact that we are pivoting away from East Asia. In other words, we're taking THAADs and Patriots out of South Korea and Japan and moving them to the Middle East. And one of these two Marine expeditionary units that we've moved to the Middle East came out of Japan. So we're weakening our defenses in East Asia. And this, of course, upsets the South Koreans greatly. But the truth is, Danny, they're even more upset about the economic consequences of what President Trump is doing. This is having disastrous effects on the economies in East Asia. And this includes, countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, and India is having a devil of a time as a consequence of this. And the situation only gets worse with time because this whole process it has a ripple effect. It's just growing and growing. And now with this blockade put on, the situation is going to get worse more rapidly. So President Trump is just in a world of hurt and he has no way out. If he did, we'd know about it. I want to make one other point to you very quickly before I forget, Danny. You want to understand that inside of Iran, there were two camps regarding the question of whether to go to Islamabad. And the hardliners said, don't do it. Don't go to Islamabad. The more dovish half of the security community inside of Iran carried the day, and they went to Islamabad. And we saw what happened. So you can rest assured when they came back to Islamabad, the hardliners said, I told you so. And that means that the next time we want to have negotiations, not only will the Iranians be reluctant to go to Islamabad, but I would be willing to bet they're more hard-nosed than ever, making a deal that's semi-favorable to us or contains a few favorable dimensions will be harder than ever.
Well, I'm going to take a look at, and it's interesting you brought that topic up about how the Iranian side may be viewing this in the split in their camp here. Because one would think that the results of this negotiation and now then the imposition of this blockade is going to give more power into the hands of the hardliners and actually more confidence to them as well. There's one other thing that may add to some confidence of theirs, and that is to look at how America's allies are reacting to this. Now, already we've had a lot of requests for the Europeans to come and join us in this blockade, and before that, we'd wanted them to help escort people through. Keir Starmer's the first one that jumped up and said, yeah, how about a no? The guy who's always been reflexively pro-American, he's leading the charge for the Europeans to say no. And then President Trump, apparently miffed by that, also, I think on that same interview with Maria Bartiromo, kind of threw NATO and our Asian allies under the bus.
One of the things that most amazes me, though, the Strait is for Japan, where they get 93% of their oil. You know that, Japan. South Korea gets 45% of its oil. These people haven't helped us. I say, are you guys going to help? And, we have 45,000 soldiers and 50,000, respectively, at those two places. 45 and 50,000 soldiers. We guard them and protect them. And when we want a little help, they don't help us. And when we wanted help from NATO, they don't help us. And we paid, I don't know if you saw, almost $1 trillion toward NATO in a very short period of time.
So, I mean, according to President Trump, and of course, the people who are watching this show are just taking him at face value. I didn't see Maria Bartiromo push back on any of this stuff. And so, according to us, man, you guys are cheating us, NATO. We've been helping you out all this time, and now all we're asking is a little help, as he put it there, a little help to where are your ships coming in that's going to help us? And by the way, Japan and South Korea, you guys get all your stuff here. You should be the one leading up here on the way in here. Now, I'm going to ask your opinion on this in a second, but I'm thinking that the Iranian side is going, oh, this is nice, because now I see them eating themselves in the back here, and they know there's no military means of opening and forcing open the Strait of Hormuz, or they would have already done it. And so if we're eating ourselves now and angering our allies in both Asia and Europe, where's this war going?
Well, the fact is, Danny, the United States Navy is by far the most powerful Navy on the planet. And if we can't open the straits and settle this conflict by ourselves, adding, some naval ships from our allies in Europe and from East Asia is not going to make any difference. It just doesn't matter. The other thing is just getting back to the pivot away from Asia. Do you really want to take a large number of Japanese and South Korean assets, military assets, and move them to the Middle East, in addition to the THAADs, the Patriots, and the Marine Expeditionary Unit? And then think about all of the high-end munitions and other weaponry that we're expending in the Gulf that won't be available for the purposes of containing China and East Asia. And you see what a disaster this is. And furthermore, in terms of our European allies, I don't think that we need our European allies to deter Russia from conquering Europe. I think this is poppycock. But nevertheless, it would be, I think, in our advantage to have good relations with our European allies. We oftentimes need them, even if they can't open the straits with a magical wand. It would be good to have positive relations with the Europeans so that we can get them to help us out with China. But instead, what's happening is that Trump is going to great lengths to wreck our relationship with our European allies. He's doing significant damage to our relationship with our allies in the Middle East, especially in the GCC. And he's doing significant damage to our relationship with our allies in East Asia. I mean, do you really think if you're an ally of the United States that you can depend on us in the crunch? Do you really think that the United States is ruled by leaders who have good strategic judgment, or just good judgment at all? I think the answer is no. I think just looking at what the United States is doing today, it's hard to believe what's happened to this country and where President Trump is leading us. And this is going to have huge consequences for us meaning the United States, in terms of our ability to project power around the world and to influence other countries, whether we are attempting to deter them or contain them, or whether we're attempting to woo them onto our side.
Well, so let me ask you, what do you think the impact of that? Because I think you just laid it out pretty effectively, pretty powerfully. We are wrecking our own alliances and our own support from Europe, from Asia, and from the Middle East as well. And on the other side of this is the Iranian side, fresh off of getting rock star status when they showed up in Islamabad, this meetings here. I mean, they were getting flowers, and the international media was everywhere, paparazzi, all this stuff, smiles, big hugs going on all over the place. And then now, coming out of this, we come off looking pretty weak in the statements that we've made here. And then when the Iranian side sees all this wreckage, self-inflicted, going on around our allies, what is that going to do to them in their war effort and their ability to resist us?
Well, the Iranians look like the adults at the table. And it's not only the Iranians. What about the Chinese and the Russians? We have three great powers in the system: the United States, China, and Russia. And China and Russia look like responsible stakeholders. Does the United States look like a responsible stakeholder? It certainly does not. Now, people, or I should say leaders around the world, are very careful about criticizing the United States too much, because the United States is so powerful, and President Trump, acts with a vengeance when he's crossed. So people go to great lengths, leaders go to great lengths not to provoke him. But you can rest assured that in private, those leaders think that he is positively dangerous. I mean, we're in a situation where our allies probably fear him more than our adversaries do. And this is a disastrous situation. As I say, it's going to have disastrous consequences for our ability to project power all over the world. If you're a global power, to put it in slightly different terms, if you're a superpower interested in projecting military might into East Asia, into the Middle East, and into Europe, it's essential that you have allies, that you have good relations with those allies, that you have international institutions, formidable international institutions, and you pay heed to those institutions and the rules that attend them, and that you pay attention to international law. This is the way we have behaved almost forever, right? We wrote the international law, we wrote the rules that underpin the institutions, and we wrote them in ways that favored us, and we, by and large, obeyed those rules and obeyed those laws because it was in our national interest. And we had allies, and we treated those allies well because it was in our national interest. Along comes President Trump, the ultimate unilateralist on the planet, and he's interested in trashing international law, trashing international institutions, and treating allies as bad, if not worse, than adversaries. And the end result of this is we're in a whale of a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, there's no question about that on so many fronts. I want to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole on the Chinese side, because I know that's one of your areas of expertise that you pay a lot of attention to. Now, I have for years said that if it would be a disaster for us to ever choose to go to war against China over Taiwan or anything else in the South China Sea, and I've listed out a bunch of reasons why in terms of our ability to our defense industrial base as compared to the Chinese industrial base, and our inability to fight into an extended war of attrition like what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, et cetera, the missiles, the distances from our logistic lines, and the 100 miles for the Chinese side, et cetera. That was just kind of in concept. Well, to me, now then, it is more clear than ever, if we are running to the limits of our power on Iran, which has a fraction of the Chinese military capabilities, then this shows everybody that we are not going to come to Taiwan's aid, or if we do, it won't do it effectively. And I was wondering what your thoughts are about this recent activity between the Chinese and the Taiwanese opposition figure, who seem to be talking a lot more, I don't know if polite's the right word, but open-minded to the Chinese side. If you think that's related to this, and if not, even for the ruling party here, it seems to me that if you say, holy snap, if I've been counting on America to come help me before, and I see they can't even take care of Iran, then I better come up with another engagement strategy with China, or I could be walking into suicide if I'm counting on the Americans to come over. How do you see that?
I think it's a logic that the logic that you just described is a logic that applies not just to Taiwan, but to Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines. As I said before, it's not simply a question of whether the United States will be there for you. And here you want to remember, we are pivoting away from Asia. So there is reason to doubt whether the United States will be there for you. But there's also the question of whether you can trust American judgment. Do you think this is a country that operates in sophisticated ways when it comes to formulating and executing military strategy? And I think almost all the evidence at this point in time is that it does not. It's not a very responsible ally. And the question then is, what do you do? What do you do if you're Taiwan and you're highly vulnerable? And, we haven't talked about this, but what about nuclear weapons? If you're Japan and you're South Korea, how do you think about depending on the American nuclear umbrella? I mean, if you're a South Korean, not only do you have to worry about nuclear weapons in the context of China, but you have to worry about nuclear weapons in the context of North Korea. And you depend on the United States for nuclear deterrence. The American nuclear shield is over your head. Well, when you see what's happening in the Middle East and that we're pivoting away from Asia, if you're South Korea, I think what happens is that you begin to think seriously about getting your own nuclear deterrent. And I'm sure that same logic applies to Japan. So it's not only Taiwan that's beginning to hedge here. And given where we're at, and given the fact that, given where we're at in the Middle East, and given that we have no solution on the horizon to the Iran war, you really wonder where things are going to go in East Asia.
And in the remainder of the time we have left here, let's kind of ask a similar question in Europe, because the limits of our ability to strike against Iran also has to be viewed in the capabilities of could we come to European aid if there's a continental-wide war against Russia. Now, you and I have talked many times that there's no evidence that Russia has any interest or intent or maybe even capacity to do so. But for the Europeans, I mean, it seems to me, and I've not seen this anybody anywhere written down or have talked to anyone, but it just seems logical to me. If I'm a European leader, I'm looking at what you guys have been doing, the type of leadership you have, and it's not just President Trump, but even you can go back to Biden before that, and the commentary you see coming out of the United States. But most importantly, what I see the limits of your capacity on the ground of the greatest military in the history of the world, et cetera. And I may need to say, okay, once we get this deal over with, and let's focus on getting that done now. But as soon as this thing is wrapped up, however it gets wrapped up, I may say, do we need to change the way we do our continental-wide security here? And does it need to pivot away from the United States? How do you see that?
Well, the thing is, Danny, that the United States under President Trump is pivoting away from Europe. The Europeans want to be joined at the hip with us. They love us. They want to keep the American security umbrella over their head. They want to keep NATO intact. They have no animus against the United States. But President Trump has a deep-seated animus against the Europeans. He loathes NATO. And as you know, he's been in power for about 15 months now, and he's done enormous damage to the alliance. And the question you have to ask yourself is what's going to happen in the remaining 2 years and 9 months of his presidency. And it seems pretty clear to me that he's going to do a lot more damage, and that what's left of NATO, assuming he lasts for all 4 years, is going to be enormous. The damage he's going to do to NATO over those total 4 years will be enormous. I don't see how it will be otherwise. And in the process, the Europeans are slowly but steadily figuring out that they have to come up with an alternative security architecture in Europe. They cannot depend on the United States anymore. They cannot depend on the American pacifier. Because President Trump is so hostile to Europe. So things are changing in fundamental ways. See, the difference between East Asia and Europe is we need the South Koreans and the Japanese to help contain China. We need those allies very much. But in Europe, there's no Soviet Union. There's no real Russian threat. I mean, people can talk about the Russian threat, but there's no great Russian threat. So it's easy for President Trump to slap around the Europeans and to talk about ending NATO and pulling American forces out of Europe, or at least greatly reducing the American military footprint in Europe. He can do that because there's no Soviet Union. There's no equivalent of the Chinese threat. There's Russia, and Russia's having a devil of a time conquering the eastern 1/5 of Ukraine. The idea that it's a threat to reach the beaches at Dunkirk is a laughable argument. So Trump can treat the Europeans with contempt, which he's been doing, and that's going to fundamentally alter the relationship across the Atlantic Ocean in ways that are hard to imagine for people like you and me, who grew up during the Cold War and in the unipolar moment when transatlantic relations were actually excellent.
Yeah, indeed they were. In the last bit of time we have here, just the last few minutes here, given all of the comments that we've made so far, and given the fact that Trump has now started this naval blockade, we'll see how it actually plays out in time. But since there's not a military solution to this, and we seem intent on trying to find one anyway, where do you see this going? And we'll just keep it narrow here, maybe the next couple of weeks. How is this going to play out in the near term?
Well, I think there are two sets of forces that are pushing Trump in opposite directions. One are the Israelis. And here we're talking about the lobby as well as Israel itself. And the Israelis and the lobby do not want any kind of agreement with Iran, unless Iran throws up its hands and basically surrenders. That's one side. On the other side, there's the international economy. And the international economy is in terrible shape. And we are, as I say, on the Titanic heading for the iceberg. And you can rest assured that President Trump is under tremendous pressure from leaders all over the world to put an end to this. And President Trump himself, I'm sure, is surrounded by advisors who fully understand that we are on the Titanic. So the question is, will President Trump at some point before the Titanic hits the iceberg pull back and tell the Israelis that they're out of luck and that we don't care what they want us to do? We're cutting a deal because it's not only in our own interest, it's in the interest of every country around the world. And in that story, Israel loses and the rest of us win. Or is he so beholden to the lobby and to Israel? And all the evidence up to now is that he is incredibly beholden to Israel and the lobby. But the question is, will that continue? And will we, because of Israel, hit the iceberg? And that's how I see this playing out. And
how do you define in this context hitting the iceberg? What does that look like? How does it manifest?
I think that the economic damage is so great that we have a global depression that's as bad, if not worse, than what happened in the late 1920s.